week, we're starting a brand new series. So if you're new with us, we take our messages, we group them together under a common theme, and then we kind of carry that out for a few weeks. And in the weeks leading up to Easter, we are in a series called ReLent. ReLent. Now, before I go into the details of what the series is about, I want to tell you a little story, all right? So, a while ago, I think back when we were first dating, Allie and I were talking, and I don't remember exactly how we got on the topic, but she had a fun fact for me. She told me what the back of the skin on the back of your elbow is called, all right? And if you want to know what that is, you can look it up. This is a fun little fact, and I didn't have a fun fact to give back to her, so I just made one up. And I said, okay, that's interesting. Do you know that the area on the back of your knee is actually called a grampster? And she goes, oh, no, I didn't know that. I was like, yeah. And I just kind of let it hang. And I never told her that I had made that up. We went like years. And I don't remember exactly how it unfolded, but there came a point years later where this came up again. And I said, oh yeah, that's not actually true. And she couldn't believe it. She was like, I told people that that's what the thing is called. I can't believe you. So she was pretty annoyed. So if you want, we could try to get that going if you want. Just go tell your friends that's what it's called. Maybe it'll take off, and then hey, that'll be fun. But really, think about this, okay? Have you ever thought about how words work? It's pretty interesting. There's a sound that comes out of someone's mouth, and then all of a sudden a picture is painted in your mind, right? Like if I say playground, there's a picture in your mind. You're thinking of a playground, right? Yours might be different from the person next to you. Maybe your ground has those little tiny white pebbles or wood chips, or maybe if you're fancy, you got the shredded tires. But you're thinking of some kind of playground just because of something that came out of my mouth. It's pretty interesting. Where we run into problems, though, is when I think a word paints one picture, but for you, it actually paints another, right? Like, I went to Ireland a few years ago, and I went with a bunch of people who were also starting churches, and I was talking to someone who was from Ireland. It was a girl, she's probably in her 30s. We were with a group. I obviously didn't have a car, and so we were all going someplace, and me and a few people were together. I said, hey, can you give us a ride? And I was asking her to transport us from one place to another, but she thought I was asking her for a lot more. And there was a miscommunication, right? Until somebody stepped in and clarified, okay, that doesn't mean that here, right? For me, this really was the issue with church. I would hear people who teach this kind of stuff, or people who know this kind of stuff, and they would say certain things thinking that a certain picture was being painted in my mind when actually it was something very different. And for a long time, that's why I kept my distance from God and faith in the church. Maybe that's your story true, too. With Lent, it was especially true. Like Lent, I don't know if you know Lent, but it's about 40 days leading up to Easter. It starts on Ash Wednesday. It ends on Easter Sunday. And for me, Lent was just the most unexciting thing in the world. It was the time of year when everybody's mom gives up chocolate, and you got the friend that tries to not watch TV, but he doesn't make it, It's a time of year when people give things up. There's a lot of confession, repentance, talk a lot about sin, and I was just totally turned off by it. It was like the opposite. It was like dark Advent. Advent's the season leading up to Christmas. In Advent, you get chocolate every day. There's songs on the radio. Lent was the opposite. I just didn't like it. But as I took some time to actually articulate what I was seeing in the picture of Lent and the terms that come with it, and sought to find what I was supposed to see, what I actually found was tremendous value and freedom in some of the ideas that come up around the season of Lent. And so for the next couple weeks, we're not gonna do anything profound, but I wanna look at some of these big ideas, these terms, and talk about what actually comes to mind when we hear these words and what's supposed to come to mind when we hear these words. And for me, or for you, I'm hoping that if you're someone who's not into church, especially for you if Jesus is unimpressive, like if honestly you're like, okay, nice guy, good teacher, if he's real, but I'm just not emotionally moved by him, my hope for you is that this will change that, or at least clarify the picture. The image, that the word that we're looking at today, the term that we're looking at in the time that we have left today, it is hard to capture the importance of understanding this word in words. Having a distorted view of this concept will totally ruin your understanding of God, Jesus, and what it means to be part of any of this. And what's interesting, it's probably the most misunderstood word in the entire church world. So a few years ago, before I tell you the word, I went on a trip. We went to Miami, and I went with our network, the network that helped us start this church, and I went with a bunch of other people who had also started brand new churches. And so we went to this place, this hotel. There's a pool, and there's a tiny hot tub, like in the pool area. 2 big pools, tiny hot tub. And so all of us, or a good number of us, are kind of crammed into this hot tub. And we don't care because we all know each other, and we're talking, having a good conversation, a little circle, maybe like 10 feet wide. All of a sudden, we see this guy approaching from a distance. Now, I'm not a very large person, but this guy made me look like a baby, all right? So he comes walking, and he's getting closer and closer to the hot tub, and we're looking around, there's no room. We're like, where's this plane gonna land, you know? And he just totally like super comfortable, just like walks in, steps over everybody, down the steps, gets right into the middle of the hot tub, and just kind of like nestles in them like a hen, you know? And he just sits there, and so our conversation's over because now there's a cookie in the cookie jar. And, but it wasn't. He like looks around, he goes, so you guys here for work? And one of us was like, yeah. And he goes, what do you do? And I was thinking like, well, this will get him out of the circle. And so somebody tells him, oh, we're a bunch of pastors. And for the first time, this guy gets uncomfortable, right? And he kind of looks around at all of us and he says, well, I went to Catholic school growing up, so I paid my dues. And I've thought about that for a while. Like really, it's a very interesting response. First of all, why does he feel the need to tell us that he paid his dues, whatever that means, right? Like if I told him, if we were architects, do you think he'd feel the need to be like, oh, well, just so you know, my house is structurally well supported? But for some reason, he feels the need to tell us like he did his part. But really what he's articulating is this framework, this way of thinking, this really misunderstood way of thinking that is widespread in our culture. This idea that we are all part of God's big game, the game of life, right? And there's right and there's wrong. There's points you get for doing the good things, and then there's points you lose when you do the bad things. And, you know, for the most part, if you speak to most people, they'll articulate some framework like this. Like, we just need to do right by God. Try to score more points in the good column than the bad column. And as long as you don't do too much wrong, like you don't rob a bank or anything, probably at the end of the day, you'll be fine. And really, the idea here, the core belief, and where we get to today's term that we're looking at, is that sin is wrong. And so in this framework, Lent becomes the 40 days leading up to Easter-ish. It's like 46 days, where you spend some time dealing with your sin, or if we're operating from this framework, you're wrong. All the wrongs you've done. And so if your faith makes you feel guilty, well, this is a season of a little extra guilt. You can try to give something up. If you don't make it, you feel more guilt on top of that. But it comes from this framework, this idea that sin is wrong, which paints a picture of a God who's the rule giver, the one who is watching closely to make sure that we're not doing too much wrong. Jesus had a brother. He actually had a few brothers, but one of his brothers was a leader in the church and actually wrote a letter that we have in our Bible now. His name was James, which is probably tough, you know? Like, can you imagine growing up and being Jesus' brother? It was rough. He was James of Nazareth, but he wasn't James Christ. So that probably was tough. Well, he explains to us how we should look at sin. You see, the issue with saying that sin is wrong is that it's a half-truth. Can somebody argue that sin is wrong? Absolutely. But the issue with half-truths is that they often paint a picture that is completely false. Right? Like when I was in high school, and I'm not recommending this, I'm not proud of this, I'm not saying you should do this, but sometimes I'd go out, my parents would say, "Where are you going?" And I would say, "Ben's house." And they'd say, "Okay, good, have fun, see you." And I'd leave, and I'd go to Ben's house, and I'd pick Ben up, and then we would go somewhere else. Right? That's a half-truth. Is it true? Well, yes. But it paints a picture that is completely false. And this paints a picture that is completely false. So here's what James says, right? He says, when you're tempted, when you're in this situation where it's like there's the right and there's the wrong, there's like the thing you want to do and there's the thing you feel like you should do, okay? Here's what should and shouldn't be going through your mind. He says, no one should say, God is tempting me. God did not set you up for that situation. He says, for God can't be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. In essence, what James is saying here, what he's going to continue to say is, okay, when you're trying to think, should I do the right thing or should I do the wrong thing? A lot of us, especially if you grew up with a religious background, you're thinking, okay, what does God want me to do here? Is God going to be disappointed? Am I gonna lose points in the right column and earn some points in the wrong column if I do this? Has God set me up here for the pass-fail situation? Am I being put to the test? In essence, James is saying, okay, like let's make this simple. Take God and just put him here for the sake of understanding this whole issue of sin. He takes him completely out of the situation. You see, when we see our right and wrong as simply doing right and wrong, simply scoring points in the good column and not getting points in the bad column, right? Losing points in the bad column. What ends up happening is like our faith begins to seem useless. It's just about keeping some arbitrary rules. And this is the kind of faith people run from. This is the kind of faith that people have been damaged by. Maybe this is the reason why you haven't been to church in years. Because somebody, maybe in a position of power, made you feel guilty to get you to do what they wanted you to do. Under the idea that, well, sin is wrong and it's gonna make God angry and you're gonna lose points. So James says, okay, like just to make it clear, just to understand what we mean when we're talking about sin. Let's just take God and put him over here for a second, okay? So here's what's happening. He says, but each person is tempted when they're dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. Now, he's not insulting you. He's not saying, he's not using the word evil as an insult. He's simply saying it's not good. It's evil. And you know this, I know this. It's the things within you that you wish weren't there. Like when your friend does really well, and there's part of you that didn't want that because you don't have it, right? Where if you're honest, you look at that and you're like, I don't want to feel that way, right? Or maybe there's someone you're not married to, right? Maybe there's someone your spouse doesn't know about, and you want to be with them. And if you're honest, like if there was a button I could push to make this desire go away, I would. I don't want that. But you do. This is what he's talking about. It's the things you don't want to want, they pull you away, they entice you. And he says, then after desire has conceived, after you did it, you said it, you bought it, it's conceived, there's probably a feeling of fulfillment. I got what I wanted. It's like hopeful. Okay, sure, I had to compromise a little bit, but I got the thing. I got the spot. I'm now in the situation. I had to compromise, but I'm in the situation I want to be now. There's this feeling like, okay, it conceived. He says it gives birth to sin. There's the word everybody loves. And sin, when it is full grown, it gives birth to death. Death, in ancient Greek, and all throughout the New Testament, it's the picture of the culmination of what nobody wants. It is the word for destruction, the word for pain. It ends in death. He's saying it takes you down a road that ends at a place that you don't want to be. The argument that he's making here, and really, like what the picture that we need to see when you hear the word sin is not wrong, but toxic. Saying this will hurt you. The language that he uses is heavy language. He talks about desire, conception, growth, and then a birth ending in death. What he's doing is using very intentional language to paint a picture of a stillborn baby, which is heavy. And that's what he's trying to communicate. In that world, like they often didn't know if a baby was gonna be born with a heart that wasn't beating. And that there would be the same kind of emotions, right? You're excited. There's hope of what could be, of what life's gonna be like with this whatever. There's an expectation that good is on the way, and then there's a moment of just pure, bitter heartbreak. He's saying that is the pattern that sin follows. It starts out thinking, all right, whatever, cool, I don't want this, I don't like that, I don't want it, but I'm gonna make my compromise. It's like, eventually that brings you to a place that crushes you. This is not about scoring points and performing in God's little game of life. This is about a father who really, genuinely wants what's best for you. He knows that my pride, that maybe makes me unwilling to apologize, may one day be the reason I don't get to see my grandkids. He knows that my jealousy may be the reason why I lose my best friend. He knows that my anger, that's just, well, it's my issue. You know, we all have our issues. I'm not perfect. You're not. So I got a short fuse. And yeah, that might be the reason that one day my kids tell their counselor that their home was not a safe place. And that hurts. That hurts. He knows that my unwillingness to forgive is the reason why I'm angry at people who did nothing to me. He knows, and yet we're so quick to write him off as the cosmic killjoy who just wants to stop us from having fun. And so James is like, okay, let's take God out of the equation and just talk about where this road leads. And how much, I mean, if that's true, and maybe you don't believe it, and that's fine, I understand that. But if it's true, how much would God have to hate you to not tell you where something was gonna lead? Even if it's hard to swallow, even if in the moment it might feel like you're being limited. And so James drives this point home in the next verse. He drives it home. He brings God back into the equation. And he says, don't be deceived, my brothers and sisters. Don't make this mistake. Why? Because we tend to. And the people he was speaking to 2,000 years ago also had the same tendency. He says, don't be deceived. Every good and perfect gift, every good and perfect gift, everything you're looking forward to later on today, everything that your best memories are made up of, everything that your greatest hopes and dreams contain, everything that you look forward to, the things in life that you treasure, those moments when you feel the purest joy you've ever felt, all of that, do you know where that comes from? James is like, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father, he says, this is kind of a weird phrase, he says, of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. The heavenly lights, that's the expression for the sun, the moon, the stars. Sometimes your shadow's long, sometimes it's short, sometimes it's gone, sometimes it's this way, that way, depending on the sun and how it's moving. He said, that's not God. God is the same all the time. He is the source of the good in your life. And because of that, when he sees you going the wrong way, he's gonna tell you. There's gonna be part of you on the inside that's like, hold on a second. Maybe I should slow down. When you read something or hear something that's like, well, God doesn't want you to do this. It's like, well, there he goes again, trying to ruin my joy. No, you see, James, he's trying to paint a new picture. A new picture of God. He's speaking to a culture, might as well be speaking to us. He's speaking to a culture that has a picture of God as the preventer of joy. And he's like, no, you need to understand God is the protector of your joy, not the preventer of it. He's trying to take care of you. He's trying to take care of us. And yet some of us, we see him like he's just tempting, putting us to the test, playing with fire. It would be like, to say that God is tempting us with stuff like this would be like me taking my 6-year-old Pokemon cards and throwing them all over Montauk Highway and being like, let's see what he does. James is like, that's not how God operates. But he is gonna tell you, look, this is a bad idea. It might be what everyone else is doing, but it might also be wreaking havoc in their lives, whether they realize it or not. It's coming from a God who genuinely loves us. Jesus is, his name means savior, which is hero. We don't really use the word savior that much, but it's the word hero, like superheroes. Those are big things. Superhero movies are popular right now. If you watch a good superhero movie, do you know what happens in that movie, for a while at some point? Watch the next one. They spend a lot of time showing you just how bad the villain is, right? You know why? Because at some point, Superman or Batman or whoever is gonna come in and save the day. And you will not feel the need for the hero unless you feel the heat of the threat. And so a lot of us are just frankly unimpressed with Jesus. And if you're there right now, I've been there and I get it. It's like, okay, Jesus, what's the big deal? Savior here. What does he save me for? Okay, so sometimes I cross the line. Okay, and thanks to Jesus, I don't lose points. Great. Like, big whoop. But if sin is really something that is toxic, and if he's not only saved us from the penalty of it, but helps us out of it, it leads us away from it, and even somehow redeems the effects of it, like takes the damage that it causes and even somehow can use that for good. Like all of a sudden, when you feel the heat of the threat, there starts to be this feeling of appreciation and gratitude. You start to understand what this actually means. But if we don't feel the heat of the threat, we don't see the need for the hero. Somebody once explained to me, like, oh, you know what Jesus did for you? It's like there's a bus coming and you're walking out in front of the bus. And he died on the cross, and that's like he pulled you out of the way of the bus. He saved you. And I think that's true. But really, like the idea of sin and keeping us from it, it's like over and over again, he's pulling us away from the bus. No, don't go that way. Like, don't go. You have no idea. In those moments where you have chosen good, you have no idea what you have saved yourself from. Over and over and over again. Because he cares for us. Because it comes from a place of love. So really my goal for today, like before we go into the next 2 weeks, my goal for today really is just for you to see a different playground when I say the word sin, or when anyone else says the word sin. It's not something that's wrong, but something that has a gotcha. It leads you to a place that you don't want to be. And over the next 2 weeks, we're gonna look at really what to do with it, especially during this season of Lent. And the answer, okay, listen, if you took a nap, if you went to sleep, this is the part you have to hear, all right? The answer to your sin is not to beat yourself up over it. It is not to feel guilty. It is not to feel shame. There is a better way. And some of us, we don't know talking about sin without feeling guilt and shame. But that is not the way that Jesus taught us to handle sin. But for that, you got to come back next week.